from Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds, and today I have with me Shanna Germain as well as Nerdarchist Ted. You guys pretty much know who he is, though. From the channel, you're probably good chance you're aware of Monte Cook Games and Shanna Germain as well. You have like tons and tons of writing accolades, game design accolades. When I was looking through the list, there's quite a bit there, and quite the dichotomy of what you actually work in. So, with no further ado, let's jump into it. Welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Hi, guys.
How you doing?
It's early, but
That's the challenge of East Coast versus West Coast. So we appreciate you getting up early and coming in and hanging out with us.
Time zones are hard. I first encountered you, Shanna, at Gen Con 50, I believe. You did the improv.
Oh yeah, that was so fun.
Yeah, with Matt and Satine and the other folks, and that was a blast. You guys were hilarious.
That was such a good, it's so fun. I feel like one of the weird things is you spend a lot of time with players, but how often do you get to spend time with other GMs, like GMing all at the same panel? That was really cool.
Yeah, I hope that's something that somebody keeps running with, because it was a lot of fun. They did another one at PAX Unplugged as well.
I was lucky enough to sit on that one. That was fun as well.
So you have a Kickstarter going on right now, I believe.
I feel like that is eternally true. I'm sure there are people in the world who are like, another one. But yeah, I mean, Kickstarter is our business model. So I feel like we often have Kickstarters. But right now we're doing something totally different, which is also true of a lot of our Kickstarters. I feel like we're always trying to push boundaries and take risks, and so this is a reprint Kickstarter. We sold out of the kids game that we created called No Thank You Evil, and it was much faster than we expected, which is great, right? It means that people, and so we decided to try launching a reprint Kickstarter. We're about halfway through, and we're about halfway toward our goal, so we're kind of right where we expect to be. And so yeah, it's been really fun. The best part for me is seeing families come and tell us stories about why they had fun with No Thank You Evil, or why they loved it. Or, I particularly love stories about kids who like sort of blossom while playing games. I just think that's such a fantastic moment. And for me, it was true as a kid too. Like, it was a place where I could suddenly just sort of expend this creative energy that I didn't know what to do with.
Well, I have to say that No Thank You Evil is a great game. I've talked about it several different times on the channel. As you see, it's my copy is behind me here, and I have played it with my family. My wife, she was a tabletop gamer, years before we got together. She's played with us with the family, but that's the only tabletop that she does. When we played, my daughter was just a few months before her 5th birthday. She's 6 now. My son, he just turned 10, so he was 8, 9 years old when we were playing, and it's a great game that kids of that age can get in and play with it. They like being able to roll the dice. They like being able to use the chits. So it's a dice rolling resource management level for them. So they wanted to role play with the monsters, and they wanted to do the different things that I provided for them, but having those chits there to play with, and having the die there that's set as, okay, it's just a D6. You have that scale of 1 to 8. It's great for them to be able to have as this intro into gaming. So myself, who I didn't start playing D&D until I was a teenager, and I've exposed my son at 9 and 10 years old to D&D, and there's stuff that he finds challenging within that system. To have something that this is a much easier entryway or intro into tabletop role playing, I think it's just utterly fantastic.
That's awesome. Thank you. I love hearing that.
From what I've seen, in some ways, No Thank You Evil is kind of like a stripped down Numenera or a Cypher system. Did you look at those systems and go, oh, you know what? This would be really easy to convert over for kids?
Our impetus was actually that we had players who were doing it on their own. James Walls is one of the families who was sort of taking Numenera and breaking it apart and running it for his young kids. They were young at the time. And we just heard all these stories about people doing this, and we thought, well, that's interesting. Like Numenera is actually kind of dark thematically, setting wise. What if we worked with this and started making something that was more thematically appropriate for that sort of age group, more fun, more lively, more sort of bubbly and weird. And we also wanted to. We also realized that like so many of the people who grew up gaming now have kids, and so it was this place where there wasn't anyone who was really making, specifically making these kinds of games for kids. And so we took the impetus from Cypher System, but we did a lot of research and work in terms of like, what kind of math can kids that age do? How much reading do they want to do? And the answer is not very much. What are their social skills like? What if someone has dyslexia? How can we work with those? Any issues, social issues are a big thing. The ability to communicate, like we wanted it to be a place where no matter what skills you brought to the table, you could find a way to articulate and play. And so we sort of started with the Cypher System, stripped it down, and then sort of kind of rebuilt it based on all of this research about kids and games and attention spans and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think I'm a fan of the Cypher System as well. We just finished up the Saber Dice Numenera game that we ran. We're waiting for season 2 to start. But the thing that I like about No Thank You Evil is like they always describe the Cypher System as you're an adjective, noun, who, verbs. Well, No Thank You Evil breaks that down into 3 different play levels. So like you can just be a princess, or you can just be whatever it is you want to throw in there, and then you can it's like, oh, I'm an adjective, noun, or you want to play the 3rd level, it's I'm an adjective, noun, who, verbs, but it's still based on the No Thank You rules as opposed to the Cypher System rules. So like it's I think it's just really well put together to be able to just slowly step them up throughout the play, and you can keep a game going. And as they grab the set of rules to their fully understanding, it's like, okay, well, now we're going to add on this other aspect. So now you have new features. So it's like a whole separate level up that you can do with the young kids.
Yeah, we really wanted, that was actually the hardest part, was because we started thinking about this as a family game. And then we were like, but wait, family games have kids who are really disparate ages, right? So you've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And we were like, we can't present this as a family game unless you can absolutely play it with your family. And so we wanted to make sure that you weren't penalized for being younger or older, right? So we didn't want to like take things away or make it harder and more difficult. And so as you advance, you get more options and you get more things to do, and there's new ways to help the sort of younger players if you want to. And so that was actually one of the things that took us the longest to figure out, was how do we really ensure that the 5-year-old and the 9-year-old, both in terms of game design and setting, can actually play together.
Do you know how long it took you to realize like that tiered mechanic? Like, was that something like, looking at that Cypher, like there's no option to break that down into, those 3 tiers. So like when you were looking at this core design, how long did it take to come up with what if we just presented it as this?
There were a lot of iterations of that, and part of the reason was it's also tied into their companions and what their companions can do, because that levels up, sort of advances as they get older. And so we realized early on that we wanted them to have companions, because kids were, they bring their stuffed animals, they bring their, toys, they bring their whatever to the table, and we wanted to give them the opportunity to put those into the game. And so originally, I think the level up system we had was just about companions. It was just that your companion became more advanced and cooler. And then we realized that wasn't enough. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board, and we had the companions stay the same and your character leveled up. And so then we eventually came to a place where you could kind of do both. And it was a lot of playtesting and sort of just being really willing to watch kids and see what works, and then go back and figure out how to make that work in the actual design of the game.
That's really cool.
Just from me looking at it and not having played, a couple of the mechanics that stand out are really good. The pool resource management that comes from those other systems, adding that in and using it as chits is pure genius, because even though smaller kids may not even be able to do math, they understand that physical representation, and they understand when they're running out of things in front of them. So it just breaks it down so basic, but at the same time they're going to accidentally learn math. So good on you for sneaking that in there.
And that was something that I did experience while playing, that, you know, even the 4-year-old was able to be like, okay, well, I have to make a decision. Do I use this last chit or not? Yeah, so.
Well, anyone that's raised small children knows, because like they know when you're taking away their cookies or their toys.
You notice they look like cookies as chips.
Yeah. They intrinsically understand the concept of loss as a human being from a very early age. And also the pet mechanic. Like, how many times, you know, have I seen or heard stories of someone, and a lot of times it's a younger person, that all they want to do is have a pet or companion in the game, and their GM is like, no, you can't do this, blah, blah,
it's too powerful.
Yeah, or whatever reasons, and you guys incorporate it right in there, and, you know, kids love that. Even my son, who's 17, that plays in Ted's D&D game, so all he wants to do is collect, you know, critters like Pokemon.
You should tell him to play the dinosaur game.
He did.
Okay.
Oh, he's got a beef with you.
Oh.
We were at Gen Con and we played a game, and he's like, all I need to know is which one of these characters has the Ankylosaurus.
Oh,
and he got the character with the Ankylosaurus, and then it's time to start the game. You know where this is going. And they're like, now hand your dinosaur to the person to the left.
Oh no. I'm breaking the hearts of kids around the world.
Yeah.
But then, you know, with the companions being able to be like, oh, well, I want that companion to be, you know, insert whatever, like that is another genius, because that's going to draw people in, because it's like, oh, well, I want my companion to be Pikachu. I want my companion to be BB-8. It absolutely can. And when kids have the toys of their favorite thing, they can literally put it on the table, and they begin to learn, you know, battle map, you know, strategy and tactics, you know, without even really thinking about it as well. So, like, you know, that's things that my kids were obsessed with when we were, you know, playing. Yeah, so it's like, okay, you know, that's what you want for your companion? Sure. And they were over the moon about it. So, like, if you've got kids and you're thinking about introducing them into, you know, this wonderful world, being able to be like, look, you can literally travel around with that thing that you're obsessed with. Like, that in and of itself is enough to get them to cross over into that threshold.
Cool.
I feel like as a D&D channel, we spend a lot of time telling people to not play that with D&D, because they're always wondering, how do you do this or how do you do that? And I'm like, why would you? You want to play Star Wars? They actually made that game. You should probably check that out. Oh, you want to introduce your kids to D&D? Well, why don't you look at one of these games that's actually designed for kids, you know, in mind? So, you know, there's a couple companies doing this. Check that out. So, and it's great. I'm going to jump into the chat and start pulling out some questions as we go. Our friend Juice, master of the game, with changes coming to Numenera and such, will No Thank You Evil see any rules changes?
I don't think so. I can't, you know, I think that one of the things about No Thank You Evil that's really different from other games is it's a constant turnover of players, right? Your players from 5 to 9 is probably, you know, unless they start GMing, is kind of the main range. And so it's constantly getting new players. Unless we, for some reason, heard huge feedback that something wasn't working, you know, I can't imagine why we would start changing the rules. The rules in this are just really the stepping stone to having fun, as opposed to, you know, a game that has to be more balanced, like Numenera, in terms of like what your options are and stuff like that. So we have no intention to do that unless suddenly there's an influx of people who are like, this isn't working, and then we consider it, probably.
If it ain't broke, why fix it?
Yeah, that's how I feel too.
I think based on, you know, all of the feedback that you've got, you wouldn't have gone to just a reprint. If there was an issue, you would have gone to a second edition.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. And basically we're just out of the thing that people like, which is kind of the best space to be in.
Yeah. So 2 things, folks. If you have a question, just put question in front of it. It makes it easier for us to pick them out. And as always, in the description, you can find plenty of links to the Kickstarter, to Monte Cook Games, to Shanna's website. And so there's some social media stuff in there as well. So stalk away. In a good way, not in the creepy way.
So the thing that I like about the Kickstarter is you not only have you want to get just the base game, you want to get everything, but you even have a backer level for you have the base game, you want to get everything else. Here's that option. So like, that's kind of what I'm eyeing at, and it's a family decision of like, do I make the investment and get all of this other stuff to encourage my son to run and play more games with the family, so like we're kind of on the edge.
You're
at the
on
moment.
The cusp, age-wise, yeah.
I'm trying to make that push because I want the other stuff, and I want the family to game together more often, as opposed to just like, okay, well, it's just me and my son, doing this other stuff.
And that's actually. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. You can elaborate on it if you want.
Okay, I was going to add that what we did with one of the expansion adventures, the Monsters, is we actually took that into consideration, and the adventures in that book are a little bit more advanced. They're a little scarier. They're a little more complicated, because we figured that kids who played and bought the original box are now going to be 2 or 3 years older. And so we actually designed it with that in mind. There's like a fun factory, like Fear Factory kind of adventure that actually is sort of, we actually put a thing at the beginning that says this is a little scarier, it's a little harder, it's really designed for people who are, kids who are ready for this, because we wanted the game to kind of grow with families. And so we are kind of keeping that in mind. But yeah, once you get to like 10 or 11, sort of jumping into Numenera or one of the other like harder cipher system games makes a ton of sense, unless you're jamming.
Does Monsters have like a new section of the map to go to, or does it like incorporated within the 4 domains?
It's actually incorporated in it. A lot of it takes place in Under the Bed, which is sort of the slightly scarier, darker space anyway.
Makes sense.
And, they're kind of arranged like, here's your fairy tale, very kind of easy kids. And then they kind of advance all the way up to Under the Bed, which is really the, ghosts and goblins and spooky things. And so a lot of them take place in that space, just to kind of give it that little bit of sort of feeling like you're getting older and advancing and you're, cooler and all those kinds of things.
So Mark Bird wants to know, my nephew is insanely obsessed with smartphone games, and I want to help him try RPGs. He's 9. He's incredibly good at acting and accents, but he says he has no imagination. Any tips?
No imagine. I find kids kind of blow me away. Like I spend my life being a creative person, and then you watch kids at a table for like 2 seconds, and I feel like my life is a sham because these kids are so creative and so amazing, and I have to step up my game. So I feel like that worry is actually not going to come out to be true. Like he is super creative. He's just nervous about it. And so I would say like the way that I trick kids into being creative who think that they aren't is when we're playing a role-playing game, I say things like, okay, so now you walk into this room, tell me what you see. And even if all they see is a dresser and they start talking about it, like suddenly it's cool and interesting because it's the thing that they focused on. And so it makes them feel really creative because it matters to them. And so that's my big trick is like, tell me what you see, help me build the world, but doing it in a way where they don't even realize that they're actually building the world. They're just telling you what you see. And I think the other, if he likes games like on the phone and stuff, he's probably playing, I'm guessing, things like Minecraft and stuff, which are actually super creative. And so, having them draw sometimes, well, I'm going to take that back. If he likes being an actor, then I would actually suggest even having him play one of the NPCs, like play a character, get in, you don't even have to be your own PC. You could just play one of the characters in the world for a little while and see how that stands. But I bet like just encouragement and positivity is going to change that the first time that someone does a thing they think they can't do. It never ends up to be that way.
So, building on that, like there's 2 things that I would look at. Number one, you're absolutely right. Asking questions is the best way to get people to, figure out how creative they are. You said that they see a dresser. Okay, well, what color is it?
Yeah.
What's on it? What's in it? And the more of these questions that you ask, they're going to give you some kind of answer. And if they're like, oh, well, it's empty, there's nothing on it. it's like, oh, well, you can keep that train going and they will eventually get into it. Additionally, if they're doing voices and they're good at that, that's a level of creativity in its own. I mean, there is a whole profession out there that are voice actors. Like, that is as creative, as anything else. So, build upon that. It's like, oh, you want to make this voice? Well, who has that voice? How do they look? What kind of things do they do? And figure out what their favorite voice is, build a character on that and let them role play it. So that's my takeaway.
My takeaway from what Ted just said was, forget about role-playing games. Put that kid to work.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
So the funny thing is, what you said, Shanna, about you feeling like a sham after watching kids for a few minutes or whatever. But the real sham is like what society feeds you after you hit a certain age, and that actually kills that creativity in kids. Because we tell our kids they can be whatever they want until they hit a certain age. Then you tell them to be realistic, right? So it's not your fault. Blame society. That's what I do. And that's the great thing about the hobby. Like, it lets us continue to be kids and be creative, because creativity isn't just for kids. Zarif Gaming wants to know: could I play with a 2 to 3 year old? And can adults play with kids in this game and have fun? Fun is a choice, my friend.
I'm going to tackle the second one first because it's a little bit easier. Yes, we designed this for parents and kids to have fun together. There are little Easter eggs and like things in there for parents that they're going to discover and be like, that the kids are totally not going to get. So there's like all kinds of like, if you are a kid at heart, I think that this game, and we have players who are groups of adults who play No Thank You Evil. There's sort of a brony contingency who play as ponies and do their whole thing, and it's all adults at the table. And there's a lot of that. So I absolutely think that it's designed to do both of those things. As far as 2 or 3, as long as you're willing to sort of forego a lot of the rules at 2 or 3 and just do story and just talk about characters and talk about your companion, and really because 2 or 3 is actually too young most of the time to like grok the rules. Kids at 2 or 3 are sad to watch things go away, and so they won't use their chits, we found, because they don't understand that they're going to come back. Sort of that delay, like things return to you rather than just go away. And even with the sort of math is kind of difficult. So I would say like 2 or 3, tell a story, roll the dice, play with the characters, kind of get them prepared. Kids as young as 4 actually can play the game, particularly if they have an older sibling who also plays the game and can kind of help them sort of through that process.
So building on that, I would say it's really going to depend upon your child. If they can understand what you're saying and what's going on, you can always give it a try and see what happens. And if you feel like, okay, well, maybe they're not quite ready for it, you pull back and you try again when they're a little bit older. I tried when my daughter was 4, and she picked up on it quite well, very interested in rolling the dice and turning in the chits. She understood that they were going to come back at some point in time, but they interacted with the world, with the characters, and had a blast with it. So there's no real harm in trying.
Do we have any artists in the chat? Because now I need to see toddlers as dragons on hordes of stuff that they will not give away. Yeah. That's not entirely true, because when they're real little, for us that have had kids, it's like you have them in the high chair and they're like, they're like a cat, right? Where they get to knock everything
Take
off.
everything. Yeah, it's interesting to see right at that 3-4 age, something often usually interesting happens with this sort of ability to grok kind of rule systems, I think, which is really interesting to watch how much they change at that particular point.
They always talk about the terrible 2s, but terrible 2s is, in my experience, is nothing compared to 3. At 3, all little kids turn into real assholes, and then at 4, you're right. They do get a little bit better. So, from there, but, your mileage.
I did not say that about kids, but that's not me.
No, I said it.
Dave's PSA on raising children.
Listen, I tend to tell people, especially women, they're gonna wreck your body first, then your life.
I want to make a game for like really young kids that, it's like I can't even think of a good title for that. It doesn't have bad words in it, so I guess we can't make that for a 2-3-year-old.
Kids are great. But you know what? I love like hanging out with little kids now, and then realizing that I get to give them back to their parents and be like, this is great. I always tease my wife. I'm like, you want another baby? We could have one more if we're running out of time. We're almost done because we have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old. So now it's like, all right, out of the house soon. But it's all good. And for me, like, I wish there was like a no thank you evil when I was trying to introduce my son to playing role-playing games, because we had started with 4th edition, and he was slightly into it, but like when it came to role-playing and imagination, he was actually there's I think there's a sweet spot, right, where role-playing and being creative for a kid is much harder, right? At the earlier ages, they just naturally do it. Yeah. And then they're going to get to like their tweens or early teens, and then they pull back on it. So they feel weird or uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's where I feel a lot of us actually try and start our kids gaming, where it might have been more productive to do it at that earlier stages. So it would just be a continuation of their childhood, essentially, and you could kind of like progress it right on through. I don't have any hard evidence on this, but I'm just speculating.
It might be an anomaly, but I had a recent gaming session where like my son, my nephew, one of my son's friends, we were gaming together, and my nephew was joining the group, and like he comes in. And him and my son's friend, they wind up going off on this back and forth role-playing thing, feeding off of my nephew's backstory about this missing blue satchel that was very important to him that he lost 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the friend is like, oh yeah, I stole that. I've got it right here. 10 minutes of them just role playing back and forth. Like, I just sat down as the DM and I'm like, all right, I don't need to write material. You guys got this. And I was just amazed. Like, I don't see veteran gamers doing this amount of back and forth on essentially a nothing thing. And they dove right into it. I was just blown away. So like, kids can sometimes utterly break that mold, utterly, destroy those preconceptions that you might have. So give them a shot.
No, actually, I think it's much more natural for kids to do that than it is for adults or older people. They do it already. They play. If you watch a group of kids playing, and when they don't think they're being observed or they're not worried about being observed, they naturally do these things anyway.
Well, you were saying that, like, at that tween age is when they're pulling away from that. Yeah. And this was a 10 and a 12-year-old. So, yeah, I was kind of offering my counter to it.
Well, Billy has always been kind of special that way anyway.
Well, that's true.
I mean, it is kind of cool because we have the advantage of having seen, some of the kids grow up. And how creative they are, and now they're playing RPGs with us, so that part is a lot of fun. So for No Thank You Evil, was it easier or harder to find playtesters?
It was easy to find them and hard to playtest is the answer to that. We actually put a call out for, we started sort of in-house, like with the kids that are in sort of our life circle, and we're like, here, kids. And then we put a call out, and we actually specifically put a call out for kids who were on the autism spectrum, who had trouble with dyslexia, who had trouble articulating or nervousness about speaking, because we wanted to sort of run the game through the gamut of people who might come and play. And we wanted it to be super accessible, because one of the things that we find is that, like, you know, kids want to be involved and included, and things like reading and, you know, forcing them to communicate verbally, if that's not their thing, can be real barriers. So we made this giant sort of list of kind of the range of playtesters that we wanted. We got tons of them. And then you sort of get in and you've got this group of 6 or 8 kids who've never role played and are all ages, and you don't know any of them. And that's really different than running for your own family, right? Where you understand their quirks and foibles a little bit. And so, you know, you've got this table of 8 kids who are somewhere between 5 and 10, and you're in a game store and there's all this chaos. And it was it was amazing and scary and overwhelming and wonderful, like, all at the same time. And I'm really frantically running the game and taking notes, and like so it was amazing. It was really, really hard, but it was really wonderful. And yeah, people were just sort of jumping to help us, which is just so amazing. I mean, the gaming community is so awesome in that way.
I'm just envisioning all these parents just drafting their kids into this.
Well, and, you know, they're like, the parents are standing around, like, and, you know, it's interesting because when you've got a table and the kids don't know each other either, which is really different than playing with a family. And so that, you know, and I asked them all to bring their thing. And so you've got a stuffed bunny, and you've got a Yoshi, and you've got and so there's a mermaid. And so everybody has their thing at the table. And it actually taught us so much beyond sort of the game rules, but also, like, my stuffed bunny is bigger than your mermaid, so no matter what the rules say, I get to squish it. You know what I mean? So we're like, we need to figure out how to make that not an issue, like size, right? Because that sense of size, when you've got things on the table, becomes suddenly very important, and power. And so we learned a ton. But it was after just running one game for like 15 minutes, I was like, how many more of these do I have?
That is funny. You know, it is fun and cool to see how kids will interact with things and how they perceive the world around them. And then you, as an adult trying to write a game, have to figure out, how do I deal with this? I was never expecting this in a playtest. Jason has a really good question here. Can you share a specific story that has stuck with you about the way No Thank You Evil has made an impact on a kid or a family or a classroom somewhere?
Oh yeah, there's so many great stories. One of my favorites is that one of my favorite stories is hearing from parents whose child is somewhere on the autism spectrum, because it feels like, you know, for parents in that particular space, there's so much, you know, information out there, and there's so much pressure, and there's so much, like, people are always just sort of trying to help you out, quote unquote, with sort of advice and stuff. And so parents who've come to me and said, like, that they watched their child blossom into this new, you know, this new space at the game is really, really fantastic. But I think for me, the biggest stories that I like is there are a couple of groups. One is the Badana group, and one is the Wheelhouse Workshop group. And they are both using No Thank You Evil to help kids work through grief and trauma. And one of the stories that they were telling me is that one of the boys had just recently lost his dad. And so they were using No Thank You Evil as a group to help, you know, to help these kids talk about things that really, I'm going to get all teary-eyed, to talk about things that really matter to them. And this kid, like, didn't want to talk about his dad and didn't want to, like, role play any dad stuff. And then suddenly, like, a couple of weeks in, just sort of started opening up and, like, created this dad character for his character. I'm gonna get all teary, but it was so and through the game worked through his dad's death. And I just feel like, you know, if there's anything a creative person wants to do, it's changing the lives of young people in this way. And I thought, I don't know, just hearing that story for me really solidified that I'm doing the right thing with my life. Sorry. I always get all teary.
That's awesome to hear. Like, you know, we've heard, you know, many times about how gaming has changed someone's life, you know, for the better. You know, I personally feel that, you know, when I get into any role-playing game, that it's an outlet, it's stress relief. You know, as a GM and as a player, you get to be creative and interact with this alternate world, regardless of what system and setting you're doing. So, like, you know, it's one of the reasons why we did this channel, because of, you know, all the great things that gaming has done for us. So I personally, I love hearing stories, and the fact that, like, you've got a game that's got the ability to reach the level of children and have this kind of impact on their lives. That's just fantastic.
When you hear stories like that and see the impact of what you're doing in the world and how it affects things, it really makes you stop and go. To me, it's an unexpected consequence, because I know from other creators and influencers, and we've ourselves have gotten several of those emails or had an article written on our site where it's like, oh, my wife passed away, and through you guys and gaming is what helped me get through, or my friend committed suicide a year ago and I've been withdrawn for the past year. The only thing that got me through was watching your videos. When we start out doing this thing, that is not something I ever considered or thought about. Just a couple of jackasses talking about rolling funny shit-based dice and playing make-believe as adults, and to think that we can positively affect the world around us. And I'm sure like Matt Mercer gets like 1 million of those messages and emails at this point.
Yeah.
And it's just it's just crazy that these like awesome unintended consequences of what we're doing with our lives. And it does validate it a little bit, I think. It's like, oh, this is worthwhile. So.
I think that you can really tell when people put passion into a creative project, because it does have those unintended consequences. Just by doing something that you're super passionate about and that you love, it kind of carries through the thing you're creating, right? And reaches out to other people in the world. And so I think that I don't know, it's almost like it's built in when you do a thing and you do it with passion and care, and that it just translates right through the thing you made to whoever's watching or playing. And, I feel that when I like read a book that I love or play a game that I love, you can just sort of feel it.
Now, have you gotten many chances to GM for kids through this process?
Yeah, I GM mostly at conventions these days for kids. I don't get to GM as much as I would like in general. It's just, or play, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But I do. I mostly end up GMing at conventions for kids because it's great for me to kind of keep touch with what kids are doing and wanting. Because if you're only running games for the kids that you sort of know, you kind of already know what they're into and how they think. And so like, getting a new batch of 5-year-olds every year at Gamehole Con or whatever sort of helps me go, oh, this is how you guys are thinking and what you're into. And so, yeah, I get to do that, but I just don't get to GM as much as I would like in general, I have to say. I really like GMing. So.
Do you have you had a chance to like compare notes with maybe some of the other folks out that are doing things in RPGs for kids? Like what is it, Adventure Playground? BJ Hensley does a lot of great stuff.
She's doing great stuff. Yeah, she's fantastic. I think she's one of those people who just does this thing with passion, and they're making all these cool things. And I think and there's some other games. Hero Kids, I think, is still out, and that's a really popular one. And then one of the ones that I really like is Little Wizards, which came out like a couple of years before No Thank You Evil. I think it's been out for a while. And I think that like so many of these people who, like BJ's, just really passionate about making games for kids, and you can really see it. And I just love watching that happen. I think it's super cool. Susan Morris also did some some D&D stuff for kids maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And she did great stuff, and she's in my writing group, so we get to kind of talk about that kind of stuff too.
It's also interesting to see too that a lot of like therapy groups and institutions are now using games like D&D as part of their therapy, like they're incorporating into their program. I believe it was Megan Connolly. We had her on, and she was talking about that. And I know that they were doing stuff in their practice, but then, from that conversation, found that there's quite a few other groups that are doing it as well.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Think about if I had that when I was a teenager. Oh my goodness, could have used that so much.
Maybe, but we might not have gotten as great works from you if you weren't, with that damage getting repaired so soon.
I see.
So you said that you have or that of groups out there that are fully adults, or that the table is full of adults playing No Thank You Evil. Do you have any intention of doing like any adult only kind of content for the game?
I don't think so. I think because here's why. I think that the reason, like, if you're an adult and you like this sort of cipher system thing and you're playing No Thank You Evil, I think it's because of the setting, not because of the rules necessarily. So if someone wanted a more complex game, they could just take the setting of No Thank You Evil and bring it into regular, they could use the cipher system rulebook. So I think that we've tried to create a bridge there, right? Whether you're a kid who's moving into more advanced role playing, or whether you're an adult who really likes the sort of fun setting of No Thank You Evil, I think that there's already a way for you to do both of those without buying more things or anything like that. So we've tried to make that transition, whichever way you're going, really easy.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of the whole point of Cipher System and the Worlds of Cipher, was to play these games with the system the way you want to.
Yeah, we like to say yes, right? Like, I mean, that was one of the important parts about creating No Thank You Evil, was how can we make it so that we can say yes to kids as often as possible without sort of creating chaos, right? Because at some point that sort of breaks down. But I feel that way about designing games for adults too, right? It's supposed to be fun. How can we get the GM to say yes? How can we get the setting to say yes, the rules to say yes? Because there's kind of nothing worse than being told no at the table, because you want, like, you're using your creative brain and you're like, I want to find a creative solution to this. And so, I always want the answer to be, okay, well, you can try that. And depending on the age, you sure, try it, versus, well, you can try that, right? So, like, depending on the age, that phrase changes.
I'm kind of like thinking back to parenting my kids. And the the expressions on their faces when they realize they can do something, or they have permission to do something, and you see the switch flip. There's magic in that.
There is. True for us as adults too, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's dark magic, but it's magic. I just remember with my kids, and it's like at some point I was like, we're in trouble. I know it, because you see them when it was my son pushing my wife's buttons, and I was watching him, and she didn't realize what he was doing. And when you watch a small child outmaneuver an adult, it's kind of funny. and it just goes to show that how devious they can be, and not to underestimate them.
Yeah, my daughter likes doing that. If mommy and daddy are on different levels of the house, it's like, hey, I'll ask daddy, can I do this? No, you got this thing to do. Okay, I go ask mommy. Well, mommy said I could.
Oh yeah, that's a standard trope, though.
They are smarter than we think they are.
Absolutely. So, what else can we expect from Monte Cook Games? What are you guys coming up in the future? Or if you have any personal projects you're working on that you wanted to talk about, we could do that as well.
Cool. I have lots of things. So you probably know that we are doing Invisible Sun, which is on a ship on its way to the U.S. right now, which is very exciting.
We're waiting for our copies.
And it, like, that game is, we've been playing. So we started a playtest group 2 years ago when we started first working on the game. And we've been playing every other week for 2 years. And that game is just sort of the joy of my heart right now. It's just so wonderful. So we're coming out with that, and right now we're working on future products for that. And then Numenera 2, sort of Numenera Destiny Discovery, we just sent to the printer, so that's kind of coming. So that's like those are two huge big projects that feel like, they're done. And then we are of course running this Kickstarter for No Thank You Evil. We want to reprint it so that people can have it by Christmas, which is something that we couldn't do without a Kickstarter. So that's why we're kickstarting it. It's just, it would take too long to sort of get to that place. So that's happening this week. And then for me personally right now, I'm working on an adventure for Gen Con. Do you guys go to Gen Con?
We are going to Gen Con.
Okay, so I'm working on a Numenera adventure using the new Numenera stuff, which has been very fun and really exciting. And my adventures always work really hard to break your heart. So if you get a chance to play in that, it should break your heart very nicely. And thinking about future stuff, we always have a lot of stuff in the fire. Nothing that I can talk about until Gen Con, probably, where we tend to make our big announcements. And I'm also working on the third Numenera novel, which is called Tomorrow's Bones, and it's kind of a seafaring, adventure-y type thing, and that'll be out next year. So,
are we going to get a follow-up to Poison Eater?
You know, a lot of people have asked me that, and I hope so. I would really like to write one. I have plans for where Talia ends up, but I don't know yet. I don't know.
I really enjoyed the characters in the novel.
Thanks.
Now, I have a bit of a confession to make. I listen to books or I read books, but then my brain dumps them very quickly, and a lot of times I forget a lot of the details, but I remember like that I enjoy it, right? And
I feel that.
Like I enjoy going through the experience, and Cinema Poison Eater is like the only thing I really. That really sticks out to me is like the saying and you know like the overarching story I remember, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting. Thanks. It was a great way to kind of like get a peek at the Numenera setting without like playing the game to get it and getting a feel for the characters and how it might play out.
Thank you. That's awesome.
So it would definitely be interesting to see that story continue.
I think so too. Maybe I need to Kickstart that. No, I'm just kidding.
Kickstart all the things. Well, I think I had seen a previous interview with you where you were talking about the Monte Cook Games business model through Kickstarters of using, like 2 Kickstarters a year to kind of fund the company forward. And we've had conversations with Monty in the past. And the gist that I got from those was he wanted to have like an old school role-playing company like they existed in the 80s, but that doesn't really seem to be a thing anymore. Right. That business model has kind of gone away, and it looks like you guys have tried to do that through Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think that's really accurate. We unlike a lot like there's giant role-playing game companies, and then there's a few small ones. And we're in a weird place because we actually have 9 full-time employees that we pay for healthcare and 401ks and, a living wage. And that's really important to us to take care of our people. And a lot of companies are able to exist by using freelancers, which is a great business model, but it's not our business model. And so, Kickstarters for us is a way to ensure that we are constantly being able to pay our creators to make amazing things and then pay for the printing and pay for that stuff. And so we couldn't survive, honestly, I don't think, in the way that we are built as a company is absolutely due to Kickstarter. It's absolutely due to our backers saying, we want these things, we're happy to pay you in advance and then trust that we will get them. And so that means that we have a lot of responsibility to make stuff and make it on time as best we can. I mean, Invisible Sun is late because it is complex and there's 1,000 pieces, and the printer was like, I don't know how to make this giant resin hand with 6 fingers, and so you run into problems that are sort of outside the company that you can't do anything about other than be really honest to your backers and be like, here's why we're late, we're doing this thing, we're making it better, we're taking the time. And so I feel like, boy, like we owe so much to Kickstarter and to our backers because there's just no way we could make a company like this in today's economy at the size that we are, and doing sort of all the right things in terms of taking care of people and high quality, products and that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, the role-playing game industry has some like weird anomalies in it, some of which I've been outspoken about for a while now. Like, I absolutely loathe pay what you want. Like when you talk about having creators have a living wage, well, you can thank pay what you want to hindering that. When people expect that they can get something for nothing and not pay the creator for it, it really does make it hard, for folks that are creators to compete with free. And then it kind of like trains. I feel like it trains the community in a bad way. To have that expectation. Yeah,
this feels like generally creators are not, I mean, being a creator, of course I say this, but it feels like creators are not as valued as they could or should be, considering, how hard I watch creators work to make a thing. And so, we try to always do a fair price, but like, charge what our products are worth, which is hours and hours and hours of, months of time from our team making a thing, plus plus materials. Like, and so I don't know, it's complicated because like as a creator, I feel like you should have the right to give your stuff away if you want. You should have the right to do, to charge what you feel you want to charge. But it does make a weird economy because, in most fields, somebody who's a doctor doesn't give their stuff away very often, right? They might donate, like they might spend time with Doctors Without Borders or something, but for the most part, they're not just going to be like, come and get my services for free. So I don't know. It's a complicated one for sure.
I look at it as like, the pay what you want is a very different aspect than, well, I'm just giving this for free and I'm going to mark it as it's zero, it's free all the time. There's places that's like, okay, well, pay what you want. You can buy it now for nothing, but if you like what it is, then please feel free to come back and repurchase it at, an actual, dollar amount, of your choosing. Like Drive-Thru RPG kind of gives you that message, that model, and hopefully a lot of people, if they really do like what they're seeing, come back. And I don't have the numbers to know how often that kind of stuff happens, but I do agree with Dave that there's a lot of passion and creativity that goes into whatever it is that you're making, whether it's a 3 to 5 page PDF, whether it's an entire 200 plus page rule book. Energy and time is going into that, thought and creativity that maybe no one else in the world might have come up with, and to just be able to throw it out there and say like, you know what, I'm not going to give you anything for this because I don't want to, not because I can't or not because I don't whatever, but just the I don't want to model. It hurts.
Yeah. It's especially when you tie in the piracy, right? Because then there's this expectation that you should be able to get a thing for free, which I think complicates that on a particular level as well.
Well, the consequence of that is what we're going to pay is the best and brightest will leave to other industries where they can do, like you said, make a living wage and raise a family and still enjoy what they do and get compensated. Yeah. So, unfortunately, until there's a fix, but as we get companies that are growing, expanding, and pushing forward, Monte Cook Games with the Coast Paizo, as we get more big name companies, I think it does help a lot. And when I talk like, I always put Monte Cook Games in like the top 5. I think there's like three companies that kind of float around like in the 3 to 5 range. Which I'm fans of, Monte Cook Games, Green Ronin Games for sure, and then obviously there's the elephants in the room, which are Wizards of the Coast and Paizo. And I guess that one of the challenges that I imagine Monte Cook Game has is the fact that like fantasy is probably the most popular genre for RPGs, so you guys do a lot of non-fantasy or non-traditional fantasy.
Yeah, I think, that's a purposeful choice in many ways because there is so much fantasy stuff out there that people who want that, like you said, there's great companies like who are already doing that kind of stuff, which isn't to say we aren't fans of fantasy. We've done some fantasy stuff. So there's a couple parts. One is that, we hire these amazing designers. We've got Monty, we've got Bruce Cordell, we've got Sean Reynolds, and their thing is coming up with cool, unusual, weird settings and worlds. And so we don't want to hamper them by saying you can only do fantasy. We want to say, what are you passionate about? Like when we did the Worlds of the Cipher System Kickstarter, Monty came to all of us on the design team and he said, tell me what you're passionate about. What do you want to write about? What book, what setting, and so like, I was like dinosaurs, and like we all ended up in these totally different places. And so we're giving people something in addition to fantasy. So that's very much a purposeful choice, but it's also an interest choice of the designers. Like I like fantasy, but man, I'm way more passionate about dinosaurs. Like I can write about dinosaurs forever, but I sort of feel like I don't know that I have anything new to add to fantasy at this point. That might change in the future. I might be like, I want to do this thing. So I think we are really trying to give people something cool and new, and not step on the toes of the people who are already making great fantasy stuff out there.
Well, and that's always been my thing too. Like, if I'm going to play fantasy, I'm probably just going to play Dungeons and Dragons. But if I'm going to play something else, I'm not going to try and play it with Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to go look at one of these other systems that these other creators are doing. Monte Cook and Bruce Cordell, for me, have always been synonymous with weird, but in a good way. Like, when I think of those guys as designers, I always think, well, they're the ones, like, even if going back to like the 3.5 days, that were making the weird stuff, you know, that you want to introduce into your game, like psionics and, you know, things from the realm of madness and that kind of stuff, which is great because I want those things too.
Well, and it's interesting to watch them break out of fantasy with that weirdness, right? So that's why we get things like Invisible Sun, or and Gods of the Fall is like a little bit fantasy-ish, but it's sort of Bruce's own kind of creation. And so, watching them put weird into totally different settings and genres, I think is really cool because they're taking it. They just have free reign, and so suddenly it's just like, wow.
Well, sometimes you can take a theme and turn it on its side, and it becomes this whole new thing that you didn't realize that you were in love with until someone exposed you to it. And, some of those things that, Monte Cook Games have put out there absolutely becomes that.
Cool.
For us, like the first time we had Monte on, to have Sean K. Reynolds hand Monte to us as the handler was definitely a fanboy moment. Having played, so much 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like those guys are a huge part of my formative gaming years.
Yeah, I think, I feel like a lot of people, it's interesting because, we were at a convention not that long ago in Canada, and, someone came to the tables and was talking to Monty, was saying, I'm such a big fan. I've played everything you've ever done. I love your games. What have you done since D&D? And this was like a year ago or 2 years ago, maybe. And we were just surprised. Like, it's amazing how many people that we have not reached who were like, for Monty, Monty was formative for them. And they don't realize, because they're sort of still focused on D&D, that he's gone on and done these other things. And so I think that's like, he was really sort of surprised and delighted to discover there was other stuff out there by Monty. So
the couple times we've had Monty on, I've gotten really angry afterwards at the fans because the turnout is so much lower because it's not D&D centric. I'm like, don't you guys know who this is? This is Monty.
We've had funny moments too, where like, we were, you go to a bookstore or game store and somebody's like, I'm the resident D&D expert, talking to Monty and not realizing who he is. And Monty's very like, not, doesn't have any ego at all. And so it's like, yeah, that's great. I love D&D. And so there's this weird moment where you're like, oh, if you knew, like Monty would never be like, well, I'm, so
I wrote
like,
those some
if
of
you
those
knew
books.
who you were talking to. It's awesome.
Those things, like, it would be just humorous to be a fly on the wall.
They are lovely.
To be like, I want to sit and watch. How does this conversation go? Because that would just utterly be hysterical.
Well, recently the Nerdarchy company almost dissolved because I was talking to the other guys and I'm like, I got Skip Williams, he's coming on, and they just have blank looks on their face. I'm like, he's the friggin' original Sage. How do you not know who Skip Williams is?
I didn't pay attention to names, sadly. Back in the day, it was an absolute fault of mine. It was just everything was D&D. Like, that's just. Yeah. It was all under this big banner, and it wasn't until after doing Nerdarchy and Dave doing these live chats that it's like, oh well, it's actually kind of important to know who these people are and to know who's a celebrity besides like just the name Gary Gygax, because that's what it was for me for a long time, even though like he obviously passed on, and it was just so many other people besides.
I think that's really common. I bet, for example, Matt Mercer gets asked all the time when he wrote D&D, right? Because he's the big name, right? And so I bet he feels that question all the time.
I now want to see a parody or skit about that. That would be amazing.
And eventually, I think he will probably write something. I don't know, but I bet it's a very common question.
What was it like for you developing and inventing D&D? That's great. So we're up on the hour mark. Anything you will throw it to you if you want anything you want to say before we go?
Thank you guys for having me. For everyone out there who's listening, I can't see the chat, so hopefully you're saying nice things. I appreciate that in advance. Go if you have kids or you want to play with kids, please go back our Kickstarter. We also have a special level for organizations, schools, churches, libraries, counselors, where you can get 2 copies of the game for a special price, because we want to help get it out into the world for people who want to use it for good. So that's there if you know of those kinds of places that might be interested. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. I was glad to finally get you on the show and get a chance to talk to you. An hour is never long enough.
It went so fast.
It does fly by. I want to thank everyone in the chat for hanging out with us today. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.
Bye.